Oh, audio is recording. I didn't remind you on the last one. Got to remind him to press record. Can you imagine? James Whittaker, the James Whittaker himself. Thank you very much for joining me on the Property Cayman podcast. A slice of Cayman life is what this is about. Different stakeholders in slightly different areas and arenas and industries come onto this chat show to really just kind of dig deeper into different things. Now, what you bring to the table, I am actually really passionate about. I think it's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about yourself. SEMA head for a little while there, deputy head of SEMA.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Much appreciated. My background is finance. So I was in finance for 19 years in Cayman, in Bermuda, in New York. My last stint in the financial sector, I did about two and a half years as deputy head of SEMA. Enjoyed my time there, but the reason I do what I do today is I wanted to find something that I was a bit more passionate about, something that I felt would make a bigger impact, and something that I wanted to get up in the mornings for. And so ultimately, I left the financial sector and moved into what I do today, which is a focus on sustainability in a couple of key sectors.
The founder and CEO of GreenTech.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So most people know GreenTech and know me for energy, but actually when I founded the company about 10 years ago, I had four major focus points, and that was to try to bring sustainability to development, to energy, to agriculture, and to transport. And so, limited time, limited resources, you've got to sort of take bites of all of those things, and some of the technology needed to catch up, for example, agriculture. But in 2023, most of that technology has caught up, and I try to do as much as I can to not only advance those from a business perspective, but advance the things that I think are going to make a big impact for Cayman.
Before we press record, you started to say something really interesting. I said, stop, this is good. And you were saying Cayman is at this juncture.
Yeah. In regards to energy, Cayman is getting to a point now where we're going to have to decide what road we take when it comes to the future of energy in the country. And so traditionally, for the last half century plus, we have had fossil fuel generation like everybody else. Yep. And fossil fuel generation requires large capex, tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars of expenditure. And so you do get what's termed as sort of natural monopolies, right, with that kind of expenditure. Because of the advancement of disruptive technology, because of what renewable energy is today, it is very democratizing. You can have some at your house. I can have some at my house. The listeners can have some at their businesses. And so that is a threat to the legacy model of an integrated monopoly utility. And so Cayman has one industry in the whole country that has a monopoly left, and that is ultimately CUC. And so I think Cayman as a country needs to decide, we all are going, to be fair to CUC, we're all going in the direction now of renewable energy, which is good. That wasn't always the case. Yeah. I've been doing this long enough to when they didn't believe in renewables, but they believe in renewables now. And, are we going to have the democratization, the competition, the consumer choice that renewable energy brings in getting to that destination? Or are we going to trade a fossil fuel monopoly for a renewable energy monopoly? And ultimately, these are decisions that are going to have to come down to the government to make.
It's touchy. I'm not going to ask certain questions, but I do have to ask, what is the reason why we're not seeing solar and wind farms immediately?
There's a couple of reasons. To be fair to the utility, a lot of it is the regulation. The regulators have not caught up with the advancements of renewables. And so, we should have programs. Hawaii's got 17, 18 different renewable energy programs that appeal to a wide variety of people. We don't have those here. So the regulation has fallen woefully behind over the years historically.
But is there any indication that that's changing? That the politicians need to change legislation around this?
I think there's a recognition that it needs to change, but the change is not quite clear yet. Yeah. And so I think that particularly the PAC government is really trying to get those regulations. And if you notice, we're doing the review of the national energy policy right now. So we're trying to advance the policies, but the regulations have to follow the policies. It doesn't make any sense to have this great policy on paper, but the regulations can't facilitate the policy. And so that's one of the challenges. But even when you get that sorted, how you get to the destination matters. The fact that we all want to get to the destination is great, but how you get to that destination matters. And that's where, the conflict of, are you going to do that in a model where the integrated monopoly utility has control of energy still for your kids and your grandkids forever? Or are we going to do this in an era where competition and consumer choice is the norm?
So GreenTech, your group, first of all, I love your passion about it. I love the story of why you left, the finance industry and went into this, because I think getting the fulfillment in what you do is really very important. It's healthier, right? And whilst also in this particular field, you're adding some benefits to Cayman, the country, the world, the planet. So I really do take my hat off to you for that effort. And I also appreciate the frustrations and the challenges in it's been more than a decade since you started this, I suppose, but you've come such a long way, and you're kind of like the go-to guy. You're always anything energy related. There's usually a James Whittaker comment.
Yeah. Depending on who you talk to, maybe not all.
Yeah, and social media, it gets spicy sometimes.
Yeah.
But, I remember, for example, the cruise berthing. I remember you came up with a really interesting solution. Of course, that was all since has come and gone, but the input that you gave was fantastic.
And ironically, that suggestion came not because I was looking for a cruise idea to convey. We were trying to actually convey the redevelopment of Georgetown into a more sustainable live, work, and play community, and how that would be very beneficial for Caymanians, because you could redevelop town, which was dying economically.
Yeah.
In a way that was, provided much broader access to more people on the economic ladder, where they could live downtown, work downtown, play downtown. And you couldn't deal with that issue without dealing with crowds and traffic. And of course, you can't deal with that without dealing with the cruise port. And so when we actually looked at the cruise port, it was slightly before all the controversy. And when we looked at it, we said, well, we couldn't destroy the reefs. It was just a no-no at the time. And then
still is.
And then we came up with the idea of, well, let's create this sky bridge, and we actually partnered with the biggest lift manufacturer in the world, and they looked at it and said, yeah, we can do this. No problem.
It's the same. It's just because there isn't a mountain and snow doesn't mean it can't work from a cruise ship to land, right?
It seems like that issue has kind of come and gone now, but if I know anything about Cayman, it'll come back around.
Yeah, it will at some point. James, why aren't you running for office? Come on now. You know everybody. You have your passion for Cayman. People understand, respect you. You've got fantastic vision and passion.
I'll never say never, but I'm a single parent, and I have a lot of support from my parents and my girlfriend and so on. But my wife passed away a few years ago, so my kids are my focus, and I have multiple companies to run. And the idea of throwing politics on top of that has never been hugely appealing.
It's a tough gig. But, there's no doubt about it. I prefer to sort of just provide support in the background and do what I can from that perspective. And I like to think that any government would tap into your knowledge and experience, consider your opinion. Oftentimes that may not necessarily be the case, but you certainly have a lot of value to add.
Yeah, I mean, I've engaged quite heavily with the last 3 administrations, 2 from the PPM and the current PAC government specifically on energy. And, I try to provide my perspective as the president of the association. I try to bring other like-minded people together and provide proposals that are fairly well thought out that politicians can wrap their heads around, as well as, part of the key to getting any of this stuff done is alignment amongst the stakeholders. And so no key stakeholder can really lose. I mean, in the end, if CUC loses or government loses or consumers lose or the industry loses, if any of the key stakeholders lose, it's probably not going to get forward. Now, not losing and wanting to do it are 2 different things.
Right.
Trying to get a utility to accept changing its business model that it's ran for almost 65 years now is
change is never easy, but sometimes it's necessary, right?
It's not the easiest thing to convince, but we try to bring ideas that all stakeholders can win. And at the end of the day, if you kind of keep what's best for Cayman in mind, that's what I try to tell
with the long-term view.
Correct.
You were the founder of the CREA, Cayman Islands Renewable Energy Association.
Yeah.
This is great.
So we founded it in 2015, and it was really an effort between Jim Knapp and I, rest his soul. Jim Knapp was one of the early pioneers of renewables here in Cayman as well, who passed away a few years ago. And it really was an attempt to bring advocates in industry and people that were arguing for more sustainability and specifically renewable energy kind of together as one group so that we could lobby with one voice, and we could just sort of bring some organization to the advocacy. And our first big effort and task was to get a national policy in place. So there was no national energy policy. At least there wasn't anything implemented.
Huge.
There was some old draft there. And so that was really our first big effort. And so fast forward 2 years later, from 2015 and 2017, the country's first national energy policy was passed. And so now we've been fighting to have it implemented.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Well, first of all, GreenTech, you provide what sort of services? It's not just renew solar panels, is it?
It's really about renewable energy and energy efficiency. Those are kind of the two buckets.
Yeah.
So obviously solar energy as well as battery storage systems. But we also provide things like energy monitoring systems so that you can monitor your consumption digitally. You know not only how much energy your solar panels are producing, but how much energy your actual house is using as well. So all those products and services that we provide kind of fit in one of those two buckets, energy efficiency or renewable energy. So
we have a mutual client, our friends Infinity Ridge. It's incredible what you did to that house. You would have known it as Prospect Ridge. We changed the name. Yep. It's Infinity Ridge now because it's been modernized, right? And what you've done to that house was absolutely incredible. Energy efficiencies, just the insulation, the Tesla battery packs, the solar roofing, the color of the walls and the roof, all of these things come into it, and it's a LEED certified property, right? Is it?
No, it didn't get LEED certification.
There's for one reason. What was that?
Well, you basically have to strip the house down to the bones. So it either has to be a total renovation retrofit, which it was a fairly substantial one. But you have to be able to, for example, tear down the walls and put insulation in the walls, and someone has to be able to verify that. So it didn't quite go to the extent.
Yeah,
that
but
LEED
by all
requires.
Accounts, it's a hardcore.
It was a complete retrofit. So it was very, very close to what you could get with LEED certification, but we didn't get certification on that. But the house is built to LEED standards. It just doesn't have the certification.
Right.
Yeah. So we looked at energy efficiency measures. So like you said, insulation. It's a fairly highly insulated house. The windows and doors also are insulated. And then you have things like energy efficient HVAC. And then really, once you get a very energy efficient house, what I always tell people is energy efficiency is always the best value. And then the renewable energy is just the cherry on top, right? And so, in all of the years that we've done houses for ourselves and our clients, we have 8,000 to 10,000 square foot houses that have zero electricity bills.
Yeah.
And people say, well, how can you achieve that? Well, oftentimes that starts with a very, very, very energy efficient design, a very energy efficient house. And then once you add renewable energy onto that, that's how you get it down to zero.
It's become an increasing priority with a lot of our homeowners purchasing homes. Is one of the unique selling points is the energy efficiency. It's not just hurricane protection and elevation. It's also going to be just what's my exposure to, the increasing fossil fuel costs to cool my home.
Yeah.
And the sun is only getting hotter.
Yeah. You find in the Caribbean, a lot of places like Cayman, we don't have property taxes, but when you look at the ongoing maintenance, it's a certain...
Who says we don't have taxes in the Cayman Islands, right?
Yeah, so not specifically property taxes other than the stamp duty, but the point I'm making is the ongoing cost of operating that home or commercial building is a big economic consideration.
Well, I always encourage any of our investors, whether it be for your primary residence or somebody buying a property for future investment purposes, to consider what they can do to upgrade their asset, not just protect it and maintain it, but actually upgrade it so that when you do come time to sell, it's going to be a little bit more attractive to the market, not just from a decor, modern look and feel standpoint, but from an energy standpoint. Yeah. Changing our windows is a big one, isn't it?
It is a big one. And, again, once you sort of get into sustainable design, one of my business partners has been doing sustainable design for almost 30 years now. And I've learned a lot from him over the years as well. And so when we've designed houses as part of our company, we've looked at things like passive cooling, right? So we use landscape as part of the cooling of the house,
How does that work?
So for example, the sun, if you have a house, depending on its orientation, so it'll rise in the morning, you can't block that from coming into the windows, right? But if there's a hedge there, then it can block the sun from coming in. Now, when the sun's directly overhead, you can have nice overhangs of your roof so that it doesn't beat on your back porch. And so,
okay, that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
I thought you were talking about using plants to cool the house, but you're actually using plants to stop the house heating up.
Yeah, stop the house from heating up. And so there's things like that. There's understanding where the winds are coming from. So if you want to open the house up and leave the fans on, that the house can stay cool. You don't always have to air condition, especially if you're having events where doors are constantly open. And then you also look at things like overhangs, like I was talking about. So if you've got a house that's facing dead south, I drive by a lot of these very, very, expensive,
South.
wealthy homes, and I see them, the glass is 3 stories tall and it's facing dead south and it has no overhang. And I go, wow, there's 60% of your electricity bill right there, right? So if you can have an overhang where when the sun, because where we are by the equator, the sun's in the south most of the time, if you can have the overhangs that it protects those windows and doors, you're going to find that design alone is going to help with the cooling. So there's a bunch of things you can do with the design. And then there's the technologies that you add, the insulation and the solar and those kinds of things that help it sort of get to what we call net zero.
The Pinnacle development on 7 Mile Beach, this was, a long time ago now, but they got the latest in these awnings that you press a button and it opens up automatically. And that was because at 12:01, the sun starts to come in.
That's right.
And so you just create this awning. And if the wind picked up, it would automatically recoil. But the issue I have with any property facing west, sure, it's a great selling point. You get the most beautiful sunsets in the world. That's wonderful. But from 12:01, that 2:30, 3 o'clock, sun beating in on the side of your house.
Right in.
The longer your overhang, the darker it becomes inside. So
one of the other strategies that we've done with customers is, depending on what your budget is, spend all of your money on the windows and doors on the side of the house that's going to be heated the most. So, if the budget's X and you can't put, ultra low E,
do it on the side that's expensive.
Do it on the side,
predominantly south and west, right?
So do it on the south and west sides where it's most expensive, and put the less spec, not cheaper windows, but less highly spec windows and doors on the parts of the house that don't get heated as much.
Also taking advantage of breeze. Yep. So if you're facing east, you get the predominant breeze will come out of the east, southeast, depends on the time of the year. Yep. Every now and then from the northwest when there's a nor'wester. But the problem is that you have the sun on the back side of the house that isn't necessarily your orientation because your pool's on the east side, but then you don't have any sun on your pool. And we know it gets cold in winter. Yeah. I know that may sound crazy to people up north, but it gets cold. It does get pretty chilly. My preferred, and I imagine you'll probably agree with me, is a north orientation.
A north orientation, particularly when the front is facing north and the back has an overhang, that tends to be the best. And the reason I say that is most people would prefer to have things like the solar panels on the south-facing side as opposed to right in front of the house on the north-facing side. If you don't mind, you can have it on the north side, but something that's either north-south facing, depending on the design, is typically the best way to do it.
Absolutely, because you get your breeze coming across you from right to left and or from left to right if the breeze changes. The sun is always going to be kind of cast on your view ahead of you, be it pool, landscape, or what have you. And then the heat stays on behind you, and you can design accordingly. Like you say, don't have 60-foot tall floor to ceiling windows if you don't have an overhang or some means to block that out.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic when you look at it. Our forefathers here in Cayman used to design their houses considering these things at a much higher level because they intuitively knew, I don't have an air conditioning system, I need breeze.
And you landscape accordingly.
You landscape accordingly. And so, if these old Caymanian houses had big overhangs on the front porch, big overhangs on the back porch, right? So nowadays with air conditioning and modern technology, we just pull a design out of a magazine and say, give
modern square box.
Give me that. But that comes at a cost too. So we're kind of going back to things that we used to do.
let's talk about solar paneling.
Sure.
Why can't I, and you're going to say I can, why can't I just get solar paneling on my roof? I mean, it's going to cost me a certain amount. Well, give me an example. Say 4,000 square foot house, solar paneling, and I want it to run everything.
Yep.
Make it happen. Can that happen?
From a technology standpoint, 100% absolutely. From a regulatory standpoint, the regulator and the utility does not allow that.
And that's not CUC, that's regulation? That's
CUC.
legislation.
That's a combination of both CUC and off-reg. It's recommendations that come from CUC and are approved by off-reg. And so CUC want to limit you to 10 kilowatts per meter. So if at your house, you can have a system that's 10 kilowatts. So it doesn't matter if your roof can handle 30 kilowatts, you're limited to 10. I can get into the reasons why that is, but that's the reason why you.
This is the stuff that makes you angry, is it?
Yeah, it's
frustrating.
It's frustrating. There are technical limits to the grid, so that's the basis that they argue. There are technical limits to the grid, but the counter argument to that is we know there's technical limits to the grid. We've always known there's technical limits to the grid, which is why you've got to upgrade the grid. And so there are answers to those problems, but it's better to not deal with those problems on a proactive basis and then let it build up and just be able to constrain that which is competition to you. So CUC doesn't want me, you, and everybody else generating. They are an integrated utility, right? So which means they're generators as well as transmission and distribution. So because they're generators, they're always going to have an inherent conflict of interest with anybody else that wants to generate.
Yeah, of course.
So the idea is let's just give them a little bit just to keep them appeased, but let us dominate the majority of this generation and keep this monopoly model together for the future.
Okay, so at some point, the fossil fuel, I got an electric car, right?
Good for you.
Yeah, but I have to plug it into my house, which uses fossil fuel in order to generate the electricity.
Charge it with diesel. I heard CUC announced today a new program where they're charging electric vehicles, which is all great. But at the end of the day, we're still charging that with charging electric vehicles with diesel, and we don't have to. We can charge electric vehicles with renewable energy, but the regulations that will allow that are on the books, but they have just never been supported by CUC or off-reg.
So I need to get solar panels on my house, which I can get through current CUC laws.
Up to 10 kilowatts.
Up to 10 kilowatts. Put this into perspective for me, please. What is 10 kilowatts?
10 kilowatts.
What does my house need?
Yeah.
Air conditioning, 3-4 people, washer, dryers, TV, all the moving parts and lights. What do I need?
Yeah, so 10 kilowatts is going to be, call it around 40 panels, 40 solar panels on your roof. That's going to provide you somewhere around $300 or $400 a month. So if your bill is $800 a month, it'll cover 30 to 50% of your bill, just depending on how much roof space you have. And so that's the sort of max that you can do. Now, if you're somebody that has a relatively small house, a very energy efficient house, 10 kilowatts may offset all of your CUC bill. So my own house, for example, was 2,200 square feet, very energy efficient, and the system that I had on my roof offset my bills for several years. Now that fuel's back up to $80, $90 a barrel, everybody is upset because of the high cost of the bills. But for the most part, up to about $300 or $400 historically, you could offset that amount of your bill with a 10 kilowatt system, right? Now again, if your roof can hold 3 times that amount, so if you drive some of these houses in Crystal Harbor, you can handle 40, 50 kilowatts on their roof, and their bills are $1,000, $2,000 a month. Well, $300 versus $2,000 isn't hugely beneficial to them, and they look at it and go, well, why am I wasting my roof space? And that's part of the bigger conversation and part of the governmental conversation. We shouldn't be wasting this roof space. The more roofs and parking lots we waste, the more land we have to cut down to build solar farms. Now, that may be in somebody else's best interest to build large solar farms and as many of those as possible. But we can produce hundreds of megawatts of power with man-modified areas. That's lakes, that's quarries, that's parking lots, that's rooftops, right? The issue there, of course, is that you can't publicly tender other people's private property. So, CUC and off-reg can't go down to A.L. Thompson's and tell Mr. Thompson that they're going to publicly tender and have a.
But they can do a public-private partnership, a joint venture,
they can
in
create
each
programs that he can opt into to provide that solar.
And that's the sort of thing that Korea is trying to.
That's right. That's the sort of things we're trying to push. But then again, that system belongs to Mr. Thompson in that case. And Mr. Thompson then becomes a competitor to the utility. And so there's this dynamic that we have to decide whether
Well, why wouldn't it be a three-way? CUC, Mr. Thompson in this example, and government?
It should be. And if CUC makes its money from transmitting and distributing power that Mr. Thompson and 100 other people are providing, there's no conflict. But if CUC desires to be the major generator of energy on island, it does not want to set a precedent where people like Mr. Thompson are producing 1, 2, 3 megawatts of power.
So perhaps legislation could be that government will say, okay, CUC, pick 100 locations, and CUC will do a joint venture with government and the private owner at only 100 locations.
Well,
or 50, 20 locations.
In essence, that's what government announced last year. So there's efforts that Korea have been working on with government. So the premier at CREF last year announced, CREF is the Caribbean Renewable Energy Forum in Miami.
Right.
And so he announced last year that government was going to initiate a policy shift with large-scale renewables. Government was going to take a majority investment stake and try to strategically expand and accelerate the adoption of renewables. And of course, it was going to do that in partnership with people like CUC, right? What it also does is it decides, to your point, we're going to build, 150 megawatts of solar at these 5 strategic locations, and doing that all at once so that you get great economies of scale. And then ideally, government helps local pensions be able to adopt into that as well and be able to generate revenue from all that critical infrastructure. And it would partner with people like CUC to do that. But again, if your agenda is to control and to own 100% of those facilities for your own interests, you're not really going to be on board with that.
It's a proper issue.
Yeah. When you peel the onion in the end and you take away all of the various arguments that can get complex, it comes down to an argument of, is a monopoly best or is choice and competition best? That's what it comes down to.
And only time will tell. But listen, is there not international pressures for Cayman to become, I don't know, sustainable? We could talk for hours. You're right. You said at the beginning, Mike, an hour's not going to be enough, but we're going to get you back and we can talk about more stuff. But is there not a timeline from which the Cayman Islands needs to adhere to an absolute minimum of renewable energies or sustainability?
So
will that speed up the process?
Yes and no. So we aren't necessarily on an international timeline where somebody else is keeping track of what we're doing, and there's sort of penalties.
But we have a global obligation.
That's right. We have obligations. So Cayman's national energy policy, for example, has adopted the Paris Agreement emissions. And so those deadlines and goals are also our deadlines and goals. And at the end of the day, the national energy policy, if you do read it, it's a very, very, very good document. It's a very good policy. We just have to execute it, right? And some people want that execution to happen in one way, and other people want it to happen in a different way. But what I would say is that we have to hold ourselves accountable to being able to meet those goals and meet those targets. Now, the UK obviously wants to see us get there, because a lot of what we have mimics a lot of what they're agreeing to as well. And I do know that the governor, for example, the previous governor that just left, he helped to arrange for technical advice and consultation with the regulators to try and help the regulation progress. So, I think there is outside help from the UK in particular, but at the end of the day, my view is these are our goals and strategies and targets, and we need to hold ourselves accountable for meeting them.
It's incredible amount of stuff that kind of certain things have to happen before other things can start happening, and it's almost desperate situation. Like, come on, everybody.
Yeah.
Change is difficult. We recognize the change is difficult, and it's also necessary. Because if we're not changing, and this will apply in many respects, industries, businesses, if you're not changing, you're just going to sit there and wither and die, is a dramatic way of saying it. But is there hope?
Yeah, I wouldn't do this if there wasn't hope. I would say that more people getting involved, the average consumer really kind of understanding what's going on, and us doing a better jojob of conveying what's going on. Korea right now I'm the chairman of the government's Energy Council, and one of our tasks for the last year and a half has been reviewing this national energy policy. And we have some very specific recommendations that we want the public to know about and we want the public to support. So for example, one of those recommendations is a right to renewable energy.
Ooh.
Right. So a consumer's right, legal right to have solar on your home, period. End of story. Up to 20 kilowatts, which is twice what's currently allowed, and energy storage. And the reason we say that is if you still just want solar on your home, that's fine, but you still have to opt into the core program, and that stops and starts at the desires and whims of OFREG and CUC. If you have a legal right to solar plus storage, as long as you're adding solar and battery storage to your house, they can't stop you from putting it in up to the limit of 20 kilowatts. And the reason for that is, A, you should have a right to be able to have solar if you want it and not have other third parties, not just for economic reasons, by the way, but for life safety and life quality reasons. After a storm, you and your family should be able to have power if you want. You shouldn't be told that you can't do that, right? And so for life safety reasons, for life quality reasons, for economic reasons, we believe you should have that right. And the reason we stipulate battery storage is because solar by itself, once you get a certain amount of solar, it will make the grid unstable unless you upgrade the grid, right? With battery systems, it can make that power stable. You can dispatch that power. You can do things called virtual power plants. You can actually provide grid benefits instead of being a grid liability, right?
And that then, instead of knocking down the mangroves and building a
correct
100-acre solar farm, you can actually.
That's right.
Everybody's participating in a common issue.
Yeah. And so other recommendations in the national energy policy are things like microgrids and community solar. Community solar, for example, is, let's say, you're somebody that I live in an apartment. I don't even own a house. Well, if there's 10,000 panels in a field, you can own 10 of those panels, right? And you'll get on your electricity bill every month all the credit that comes off of those panels that aren't even at your house. It's part of a community solar array.
Why is that happening?
It has been blocked historically. Because again, if I wanted to build that array and I wanted...
monopoly.
Because of the monopoly. Right, and the regulations.
Let's try and be I will try and be devil's advocate here.
Sure.
They've put in tens of millions of infrastructure and costs and et cetera, et cetera. Why would they want to willingly let that happen? Because they're going to lose. They're going to lose revenue, and a slice of the market.
That is correct. On the generation side, they certainly will if you and me and everybody else has the choice to generate. And so the answer to that question is yes. If they keep this integrated monopoly model, i.e. generation and transmission and distribution, they will lose revenue, and they don't want to lose revenue. But most progressive utilities understand that generation, renewable energy allows everybody to generate. So you're ideally, as a company, to be progressive, you're harnessing that generation, transmitting it and distributing it, and making your money that way. That way there's no inherent conflict with me or you or some community solar array or anybody that wants to generate, right? You're inviting generation. So if you take the example of Hawaii is the world leader in renewable energy penetration at this point. Their utility used to fight renewable energy, particularly rooftop solar, the same way that CUC is doing it right now. But ultimately, their politicians and their government said, no, we're going to get 100% renewable energy and we're going to march forward in doing this. And so what you find in Hawaii today is the utility and the government are encouraging everybody to have solar plus batteries. Get as much solar up on your homes as possible. Give me as much generation as you can so that I can transmit and distribute it so that the island has cheaper, cleaner, better power. And so there's not a conflict there anymore because the politicians laid down the mark and said, this is the way it's going to be. And so we just have to decide. Does
the Cayman Islands government sustainable development plan has yet to be
enacted or
produced, discussed, consulted, or at least discussed with different stakeholders. But is that not the sort of thing to make Cayman? Let's just shift gears a little bit here and talk about Cayman's development. Sustainable development is a hot topic. Yep. Global warming, setbacks. We see the issues in certain sectors of beaches around Cayman where people have built too close, and now the energy and power of a wave is hitting the wall and taking the sand away. There has to be a slower,
Yep.
Will energy come into that?
It has to.
But will it? Will CREA, will government?
CREA is going to be advocating that it's a key part of that. Energy is a part of everything we do. This pen that I have here You know, it took energy to get this into my hand. Somebody had to produce it, make it in a factory. We shipped it over. The company that sold it to me had to pay a light bill. There's energy embedded into this, right? There's energies in everything that we do. So if we're going to have sustainable buildings, well, how do you do that without having cleaner, cheaper, more sustainable energy? You really can't. So it has to be a key part of it. But there's a lot of factors, as you well know, that goes into sustainable development as well. But energy has to be a part of that conversation. And so I want to see government do things that are a little bit courageous, in the sense that governments tend to be afraid to mandate things. And I'm also a very big fan of providing incentives as opposed to mandates. But there are some basic things you're going to have to mandate, right? So even for like residential homes, I mean, people bringing in 10 SEER air conditioning. That's like bringing in old filament bulbs at this point, right?
Really?
And so
There should be a minimum of 14 SEER or something.
Right. There should be like a minimum of a high SEER air conditioning system, and or just make those 10 or 12 or 14 SEER air conditions, put 50% duty on them. And then the other ones, drop it to 10% duty. You have to shift the behavior, right? And government can do that by using mechanisms at their disposal. But I do think that government is going to have to just be determined about what they want sustainable development to look like. And then they have to, I think they have to put some mandates into as well.
Cayman Brac Power and Light.
Yep.
Private entity buys it, and Little Cayman. Why wouldn't they, I mean, perhaps they are, I don't know, and I don't know if you even have the remotest of involvement in this, but why wouldn't they turn Little Cayman as a model for purely 100% renewable energy? And all the BRAC as well. I mean, they, you know?
Yeah. So my understanding is the entity that bought that, their plan is to go 100% renewable, or at least a large amount of renewables that is economically viable and feasible. I think it's a little bit unfair to kind of put them in the same boat as Grand Cayman, simply because they've just changed ownership. That ownership now has to formulate its plan. I think Ofreg's giving them a year or something to come up and say, hey, this is what we're going to do.
But it's an incredible opportunity.
It is an opportunity, because just like Cayman, right? I mean, you have small economies of scale. This is one of the things that I'm passionate about, and why I'm so passionate about Cayman, you know, not just being a regional leader, but a world leader. I tell people that all the time, and they kind of look at me like, oh, Cayman can be a world leader in sustainable agriculture.
I agree with you.
We've got relative wealth. We've got first world infrastructure, and we're small.
And we've got brilliant minds here.
And you have
the small is important, because that is actually the ability for us to, like, if you're in a little 14-foot tin boat, you can pivot really quickly.
No, we're not in the United States, where we've got 350 million people and it's just huge land mass. Like, we could be 100% renewable energy in like 7 years. That's
and be a pioneer.
And
in that.
Absolutely. And I go to all these other Caribbean islands, and I've traveled most of the Caribbean at this point over the 10 years that I've been in this industry. And I see a lot of other islands who have the political will and desire to accelerate much more than I see here historically. But they don't have any money. And so they have to beg the UN.
Oh, Cayman's got money.
Cayman's got money. And so financing these projects is nothing, right? And doing it in a way that is maximizing benefit to the country, I think is the key. But we have so much opportunity, but we're not going anywhere. I've been doing this now over a decade. In the 12 years that we've been pursuing renewable energy in Cayman, we're at 3% renewable energy. Hawaii is at like almost 40%. It's ridiculous.
That's frustrating.
It is. There are 800.
But things are changing.
They are changing slowly but surely.
Public demand.
Yep. And this is what I was saying. There's some key choices here now. We are going to get to a renewable energy future. Now, exactly when, we can debate, but the how is what is contested.
Okay.
Right?
What happens if there's a new party, a political party in Cayman, the Green Party? Okay. Why would a Caymanian vote for a Green Party? Whose main legislation is renewable energy and sustainable development. And where's the benefits? Economically, sure, you can get past ministers of finance that, you know, create an incredible team, but their main modus operandi is renewable.
Yeah. I think you would do so because the people have made an argument for the economics, but also the social and the environmental, and they've made that relatable to you. I do think it takes a mindset that is willing to look at, I'm going to make decisions today, understanding that I'm keeping in mind my children and my grandchildren. Now, we all say that, but a lot of the times the decision making is not.
It's not based on the long term.
It's very short term.
Yeah.
Right? Very short term thinking.
That's a classic problem.
And so I think you have to convince the masses that the decisions and the things that you want to push for have not just some future unknown. I mean, your children and your grandchildren.
Yeah.
Right? Human beings tend not to want to think too far in the future, but you can think about your children and your grandchildren. And so if you want to make decisions today, I don't remember exactly what the quote is, but it says, wise men plant trees under which they know they'll never sit. And so I think any party has to make that the core part of their message. And I think, I have a lot of faith in my Caymanian people. I think enough of them will buy into that to know that, even if I install lots of renewable energy today and the price doesn't go down, the good part about renewable energy is it doesn't go up either, right? It gives you price stability. Well, if that allows your economy to then grow and to have a base of which that, somebody wants to start a resort here, they know what the cost of energy is going to be, right? If somebody wants to have renewable energy at their house, they know that they can, make that as a cost benefit. But in the event of a hurricane, my children and my grandchildren and everyone in the house is protected. I think you have to relay all of these things to the masses if you want to get that kind of support. It's really about decision making for the future. It's not always an easy sell.
It's not an easy sell because a lot of people are stuck in the whirlwind of here and now and present, and I can't even remotely think about the future. I got to worry about here and now.
Yeah. And that's part of the challenge of governing, right? Is government has to make decisions that it knows is in the best interest of future generations, but at the same time, it's got to deal with the here and now problems as well, and that's part of the challenge of governing.
Gosh, I'd love, my business, and trying to bring this, I suppose, give an example. My business was designed to change the way things were always done. Instead of just doing something because, well, that's just the way it's done, I always want to see where I can make something more efficient or fine-tuned, or a better experience can come from that. Now, not just being different for the sake of being different, but like, how can we make a good thing phenomenal? And I've very much enjoyed the process, the challenge. Certain things really do have to stay the same because it is actually at its most efficient function. But the idea of the owner of Cayman Brac Power and Light and for Little Cayman looking into how they could make, and just almost like as a case model, it's small enough. The Cayman Islands are small enough, frankly, I get it. But Little Cayman and the Brac are small enough where they can sort of, like you say, perhaps in 7 years' time, full 100% renewable energy, all cars are electric that are charged off of the natural environment.
Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, with the size of the grid in Cayman Brac, like 3 projects in that country is 80% renewables. And you can do that in 2-3 years.
And we could be a global leader in example case study.
And so their challenge, they're going to have multiple challenges, but one of their challenges is going to be, okay, we need to upgrade this grid, we need to upgrade our technology, we need to bring in renewables, and we have to do all that in a case that makes economic sense for the amount of energy the island is producing, right? And so it's not, we'll just build a 50 megawatt solar farm and then Bob's your uncle.
And then we've got it.
And then we've got it and it's all done. You have to do it in a way that is, it's called an energy transition for a reason, right? There's a transition process that has to happen there. And like I said, for the sister islands, because of the change in ownership, we can't really critique or criticize or support what they've done because we don't know what their plan is quite yet. They're still working that out right now. And at some point, the public will get a view of what their integrated resource plan looks like and whether or not Cayman Brac and Little Cayman will be renewables very quickly. But Grand Cayman is the same situation. Relatively speaking, we need about 400 megawatts of renewable energy to get to 100% renewable energy. There are projects in the United States that are bigger than 400 megawatts, single projects.
If I put, again, use that same example from before, what did I say, 4,000 square foot house, faces north, I got energy efficiency windows where they need to be, I got insulation in the plant-based insulation in the roof, and I need 40 panels, you said, to generate 10 megawatts.
10 kilowatts.
10 kilowatts, sorry,
Yep.
of energy. what will that do to my electricity bill that is currently, say, I don't know, what would that example be? $500, $700.
Right. So right now, 10 kilowatts will eliminate about half of that bill.
Okay. And what does it cost to put on those 40 panels?
Those 40 panels, depending, there's variables. Do you have a 1-story, 3-story? But on average, it's about $25,000.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
the $350 it saves me a month.
Yep.
Over that 25,000.
Yeah. So what you find now is in 8 years, 9 years, that system pays for itself. And under the current regulations, the utility has to pay you for that solar for a minimum of 25 years. So once your system is fully paid off, then the rest of those years are just all profit for you.
Just an excellent investment.
It is a very good investment.
If you can afford that cash flow up front.
If you can afford the cash flow. And that's another thing, right? So one of our big things from CREA is we want to see the democratization of energy, but we also want to see access for all, right? Not just...
So that's your first step.
That's our first step, the democratization, because that allows for consumer choice. Keep in mind, keeping the integrated monopoly model that Cayman has had in a renewable energy future is predicated on diminishing consumer choice and diminishing competition. You can't have, it's binary. So for them to have the generation, they have to diminish competition and they have to diminish consumer choice, right? And so if you don't want that to be the case, which we don't, we not only want everybody to have choice and for there to be lots of competition and for there to be dozens of companies and hundreds of people working in the sector, but we also want people to have access for all. And there are things that we can do on the finance side and the regulation side that can put solar in the hands of almost everybody in Cayman.
And CUC can win from this, like you gave the example in Hawaii.
It is convincing CUC that changing their business model is in the best interest of the country and ultimately in the best interest of them.
I was going to say for themselves as well.
Yeah. And I believe that it is. I mean, if I was Fortis, I would embrace what the government announced instead of trying to fight it. And I would embrace other people generating and focus on growing my business from a transmission and distribution perspective. I've said to people at CUC already, if you can focus on T&D and not fighting generation by other people, and we can bring down the cost of energy because we're doing cleaner, cheaper energy, I'll be the first person in Off-Reg sitting next to you asking for CUC to be able to make more money. If you can lower the cost to Caymanians by 25, 30% and you want to make 10% profit instead of 7% profit,
yeah, all day long.
Bob's your uncle. Right?
And they deserve to have that first right of refusal almost.
And creating incentives so that there isn't that conflict. But again, you have to be willing to give up that generation, right? Not the existing fossil fuel generation, all the future renewable energy generation, right? Because again, the inherent tenet of renewables is that it is democratizing, right? It's the difference between
James,
landlines and phone lines, right?
Are you diplomatic in your delivery?
I try to be. I don't always succeed. I don't always succeed, but I try to be.
It's a difficult situation. It is.
If it was easy, it would have been done already. But we're at 3% after a decade, and
well, I commend you for your efforts and what you're bringing, because if it's not you, there's little else happening in this field. You're definitely a leader when it comes to this sort of stuff. Your knowledge, experience, your passion, all things Cayman. It's a very you're incredible at what you do, and I commend you for your efforts, and I wish you every success. And from the real estate perspective, I can tell you that we at Property Cayman are big believers in sustainability as well. We're trying to be the differentiators in this arena instead of doing the same old, just build a concrete jungle and sell them. Right. That's not our interest. Our interest is longevity, sustainability, doing the right thing. We embrace change, and you can harness that change to take you to new levels. And I think you're absolutely right when you say, whilst difficult to make changes, it's ultimately for the betterment of everybody, including the people doing the change themselves. It's just a matter of taking that leap of faith and believing that this is, first of all, it's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. But we do have a timeline. The world, the Mother Earth has a timeline in which we need to make these changes. And
I would say one of the big things that we have to consider too is when we talk about being more sustainable and making changes as a country. Cayman's aggregate emissions is minuscule on the global level. But we are about the 25th worst carbon polluter on the planet.
Cayman.
Cayman. If you take out industrialized nations, we're 5th or 6th in the world as the worst carbon polluters. So we can't look at anybody on the world stage
That's a horrific statistic.
and tell them to clean up their act when we are one of the worst per capita energy carbon emitters in the world, right? So part of us playing our role in the global climate
this is the
change
faceplant moment. This is like, oh gosh, this is terrible.
part of us playing our role in the climate change conversation is for us to be a model of change, but also for us to do our part.
That's my example, being the model. And Cayman has the opportunity because it's small enough to actually have that, the ability
100%.
to.
100%.
Well, I wish you the very best of luck and support. You know, you've got a friend at the table that will do what we can to help and support. And part of this podcast brings awareness and hopefully more exposure to you in your efforts. And you're a legend, James.
Thanks.
Well
Appreciate
done.
it.
Thank you for everything you're doing. And we wish you the very best going forward.
Thanks for inviting me. Always happy to come back.
Thank you. You'll be back. I promise you that. We've got lots to talk about.